Hello and welcome. This is Lino Tadros from Falafel Software, and in this video we'll start attacking the situation where we need to deploy Sitefinity 4 on Azure. There is two stories to this project. Part of it is the SQL Azure migration and also the application itself, which is with the App Fabric in Azure and so on. So in this first part one of the video, we're going to attack the Sitefinity by using SQL Azure first. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I would like to create a brand new project here in Sitefinity. This is using the latest service pack from Sitefinity 4.1. We'll call, for instance, our site test Azure. We'll go ahead and create it in here. We'll create a license, so we'll use our falafel.com website, the license in here, and that's a standard license for 5 users. All that stuff is fine. It will create all the file system for the test Azure website. And now we can go ahead and administer this website. So the first thing we would definitely want to make sure people understand, as of the writing of this course, or actually this video itself being recorded, we are at Service Pack 3 of Sitefinity. And right now you will notice as soon as you run the Test Azure website or web application for the first time, you can choose your database. A lot of people will go ahead and click on the Microsoft SQL Azure, and they will automatically have their full qualified name for the Windows.net, where their server is at, the port is 143, pass their username and password, and whether they have the database or not, they would like to create that in there. Folks, this part in here is not recommended. I actually never was able to get this to work with Azure by creating the database or even hooking up to an existing database by going immediately while you're building the site to Microsoft SQL Azure. So I do not recommend for you to do this. I was not able to make it work. Probably in the future, maybe on 4.2 or 4.3 or future, you will be able to create everything from here. For right now, the best way to get this to work is to actually create a regular SQL Server application based in here, or use a SQL Express. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to go ahead and start with a SQL Express for right now, and let's go ahead and let it finish up creating all the files it needs to do. Alrighty, I'm going to go in here, we'll create my name, and we'll keep it as admin. We'll make it admin123 and admin123. Alrighty, I'll pass in my email address, and we'll say I'm done. Okay. We're going to go ahead and save that password, and I've got myself a website ready to go. Let's go ahead and create at least one quick page in here so we have something in the database so we can actually verify that it's working. And we are going to create the page. All the stuff, of course, is happening on my own SQL Express that is built part of the app data directory for this website. And we're going to call this one home page, and it's good enough. We'll just go ahead and create this page. We'll drop a content block, and we will type some text in here, and we'll say something like welcome to SQL Azure. Welcome to SQL Azure. Okay, we'll save this guy, and we are done. Let's publish this page. And we got ourselves a home page for our new Test Azure web application that we just created. Anybody going to this website will end up with a page that looks like what is going to show up right here, saying welcome to SQL Azure. All right, great. Now the next step is to find a way to migrate this SQL database to SQL Azure, so we can actually run this database, the website itself locally on my machine, but all the data is coming from SQL Azure itself. All right. So let's go ahead and get started with that. First of all, let me go ahead and open another page in here. And I'm going to access my Azure account for Microsoft Azure. We'll go to, say, windowsazure.com. That is the website for the Windows Azure. You should get yourself familiar with all the different features available. It's a pretty wonderful website. There is a lot of features, and every month we get more and more capabilities into the site, especially for the management portal. And most of it is written in Silverlight, so it actually works pretty well. So I'm going to go into the management portal right now. I'm going to enter my username and password, azure@falafel.com. I'll pass in the password. we entered that wrong. There we go. Let's go ahead and sign in. Okay, alrighty, we're in. So once we get in here, you'll notice it loaded Silverlight. This is all running in Silverlight right now. And I'm going to click on database for right now. Actually, we have multiple databases already installed because we have a lot of different applications in the company running on that, but that's not our main concern. Our main concern is definitely we have our own server in here that is running this Firewall Azure, and there is a lot of different databases installed. One of them, of course, is the main master database for SQL Server. Let me go ahead now and go here, and I would like to create a brand new database. Let's go ahead and give it a name. We'll go ahead and say this is SF4 test, for instance. We can choose from the web edition or the business edition. It has to do with how much space you want to allocate for it. You can get from 1 gig to 1 gig to 5 gig based on the web. If you choose business, you can choose from 10 all the way to 50 gig if you'd like. So for this one, we'll leave it at 1 gig and we'll go ahead and create the database. So we'll wait for a second in here. That is our 1 gig got created and we are ready to go. Alrighty. Now, there is something that you won't really be able to do from here, which is to assign a new user, for instance, to the system. I'm sure it will come later on in the Silverlight application to be able to create a new user in here. But for right now, we will have to hook up to our Windows Azure, SQL Server Azure in here using the regular SQL Server tool for Management Studio to be able to do that. So what else I wanted to show you in here? Yes, the firewall rules. You will notice that, for instance, I want to make sure that not everybody can have access to this machine. So now that you guys know, for instance, the machine name, you cannot guess the password, and you cannot be able to come in here and be able to manage our databases. So we have firewall rules. I have, for instance, for some of the employees, I have the IP addresses from everybody coming from the office in here for Falafel software. But if you're not part of this IP ranges, you will not be able to get this to work. All right, so far, so good. Now to the next step, and that is being able to go to the Codeplex and download a migration tool. Maybe in the future this will be built into the Silverlight application, but for right now, I recommend for you to go download the SQL Azure Management Migration Wizard for the codeplex.com. Alrighty, so you click on download in here. That will download a very small little application here. A zip file contains a lot of localization and a couple of EXEs and so on, but that is your main tool for migrating a database for that. Alrighty, so I already downloaded this, but this is where you're going to be downloading it from. And now let's go ahead and find it on my machine. And there it is. It's called SQL Azure Migration Wizard, mw.exe. Once you download that, let's go ahead and find it where we install it. There it is. I'm going to run the exe. This exe in here, folks, for Sitefinity, you want to use the Analyze and Migrate for SQL database in here. That is the option that you'd like to get. And what I'd like to do at this point is to migrate my SQL Express database that came from Sitefinity based on the Test Azure website and transform this into my SQL Azure that I just created, which is called Sitefinity SF4 test. Sounds good? Alrighty. Of course, if I'm going to start right now, unfortunately, it will not find the Sitefinity database. The Sitefinity database is available as a file. Let me go ahead and show you what that is. If we go to the C, we'll go to the program files in here. We'll look for Telerik. And I am going to also go to Sitefinity 4.1 projects. And hopefully in here we'll see the new Test Azure right there. If I open this, this is the entire web application project in here. Under app data, there is a Sitefinity.mdf. It's about 6.5 megs right now. It doesn't have much in it at all other than a couple of usernames and the page. But right now, this is the database that I would like to do the migration for. For getting this to work, what you have to do is to have to attach this MDF to a SQL server running on your machine. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open up the SQL Server Management Studio. This is the 2008. And by the way, for the 2008, you have to have the R2 to be able to use Azure. Otherwise, this will not work. I'm going to hook up to my local machine. We'll say connect there. I'm going to use my NT authentication. There is my database. And right now, I'm going to go to databases and I'm going to say attach this database. We'll add this guy. And let's find out what is our test Azure. There is my test Azure directory. There is the app data. And there is my sitefinity.mdf. It is actually being used by the process. I understand. Okay, let me go ahead and go back in here, and we'll go ahead and stop using it. Otherwise, it will not be happy with us. There's the pages. I'm gonna shut this down. We'll go in here. This guy also has to be shut down. You see that Project Test Azure is running, so I'm going to actually close this down for right now. All right, so now we don't have any access to this database, so we can actually continue with whatever we were doing before. So let's go in here. We'll attach the MDF. Okay, it was able to do that. I'm going to say OK. And now when I go back to SQL Server, you will notice that this test Azure app data sitefinity.mdf has been automatically attached to my databases for the SQL Server running on this machine. All right, that's great. So that's a good step to do for right now. And now I can actually run this application. And I'm going to say SQL Azure Migration Wizard, SQL Database for the migration and the analyzation. We'll say next. And the first thing is going to ask you, where is that database that you'd like to move to Azure? It's available on my local host. I'm going to use NT authentication. Give me a list of all the databases available, which all these here on the left side. We'll say connect. These are all of them. There is the test Azure one that I'm interested in that got attached. I'm going to say next. And now I'm going to say bring all the objects. Very important to bring in all the database objects. We'll say next. And final next. Ready to generate the SQL script? We'll say yes. And we'll do auto scroll in here. It will do tons of stuff to create all the different script it needs for this to work. All the different tables available in the regular Sitefinity database. So we'll wait to finish creating all the scripts. This is a schema and data is being created. All the foreign keys, everything is being done right now. And it is done. And at the end, it will tell you it took 21 seconds, and it will give you all the information that everything has been created correctly. We'll say next. And now it's asking you about the database in Azure that you'd like to get to. So we're going to have to get the name of this database. We'll go, for instance, in here. I believe we left it right there. There you go. The name of our database is right here. We'll just copy that name and we'll go back in here and we'll put it instead of the word server. So your server will end up looking like this. The name of your server .database.windows.net. We are going to definitely use a specific username and an ID. In our case in here, I'm going to use my main username for the SQL Azure, which is falafel admin. I'm going to pass in here my password for this guy, and I'm going to say connect. Yes. Let's see, yes in there. The username had to be the falafel admin at the name of the server. And there you go. It found all the different databases available. It doesn't show you the master database, which is fine. But there is my SF4 test, which is completely empty at this point. Okay? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say next. It will execute the script that we just created. It will take about 23 seconds to create all that stuff. And now we're going to run all the stuff against this SF4 test in Azure. We'll say yes. And now we're going to sit back, relax, and wait for about 482 different things to take place. And they're all, as you can see, they're all successful. So this is just working fine. So I'm going to pause this for a few seconds until this is done. It should take about a minute to do all that stuff, but we'll be back in a second. All right, and we are almost done. As you can see in here, it will get to 482 really quickly. And the conversion would have taken place and it would be successful. And it's done. I'm going to go ahead and now say exit. And let's go back to our database. There is the SF4 test. Let's see if that worked out. We go ahead and say refresh this guy. And now we have 472K. It's actually bigger than that. And you will notice that there is a database now available inside of here. I can actually manage this database. Notice it will open up the Silverlight application as well. I'm going to log into this guy. And I'll show you another tool that comes with the SQL Azure. Very nice tool. Notice here it's very fancy. It has a cube and all that. And that is our Sitefinity application running in Azure. I can open up the tables and you'll be able to see all the 160 tables available inside of there as well. Okay, so there they are. These are all the tables coming from Sitefinity. So we are in Azure right now. Not quite. I mean, the database, the application itself still doesn't load its stuff from the SQL Azure, but we're almost there. Okay, so the database has been converted. What is the one thing that we did not do that is very, very important to do as well is to create a user for this database. So in here for SF4 test, I would like to create a user. We call it, for instance, SF user, for instance, and that will be the username, and we'll create a password for it as well to be able to access that. Okay, very important to be able to do that. You cannot do this, folks, from inside of the Windows Azure.com system in here for that platform. You'll have to do this from the regular Microsoft SQL Server, and you have to have 2008 R2. If you don't have R2, you will not be able to do that either. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go ahead and connect to it. And this time I'm going to hook up to my own database on Azure right there. And I'm going to go ahead and do falafel admin and pass in my password. And we'll connect to the database. And we'll wait a couple of seconds. And there it is. We're hooked up right now directly to the databases. And that is my SF4 test. These are all the tables that I have. So it looks good so far. I want to make sure in my security, though, I would like to create a user. See, right now I don't have a user really that I can actually use that will allow me to do this. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to actually right click and say new user. If you're familiar with SQL Server, that usually brings up a dialog, and that dialog will allow you to do everything visually. For Azure, there is no dialog. Everything has to be done with scripts. So when you say a new user, it will at least create the script for you. The thing that you absolutely have to remember to do, for instance, here I'm going to say SF user, for instance, and I'm going to make this based on a login for SF for admin. Okay, that's a login that I created earlier for the entire database, not just for this test, for this SF4 test. That's called SF4 admin. And we don't need the default schema, so I can actually take all the stuff out of here. And the important part is that this guy has to be the owner of the database. Otherwise, you'll have a lot of problems. So we're going to come in here and we'll say SF user. Sounds good? Once you're done with that, let's right click and say execute this guy, and it's completed and we are in good shape. I can go back to users, refresh the screen, and there is my guy SF user available in my users for the SF4 test. Okay? What is next? Next is to actually tell the application now, the Sitefinity application itself, that we no longer want to hook up to SQL Express, but we would like to hook up directly to Azure. So I'm going to come in here, minimize this, minimize that. Don't need this anymore. And let me go ahead and open up Visual Studio. And the easiest way for Visual Studio is to tell it to go ahead and open up the project. We'll go to Program Files one more time, Telerik, Sitefinity 4.1, Projects, and there is my test Azure in here. So I'm going to open up this project inside of Visual Studio. And the interesting part is in the app data, I will have Sitefinity right there. I'm going to show all my files. And I have my configuration, and I'm interested in this data config.config file. Let's go ahead and open up this file. In here, we'll make this a little bit smaller so you can see better. I don't need this window for this example. Alrighty, so in here, folks, I have my data connection to the database using the SQL Express. So obviously, I do not want to do that. So I'm going to actually comment this guy out. And now I would like to bring in the correct connection string to SQL Azure. So I have the line here that is provided by SQL Azure. I'm going to say Control C, and I'll bring it over here. We'll do a Control V. So if you take a look in here, for instance, we'll say add type SQL Azure. This is very, very important to have in here, okay? That you have to have a DB type equals SQL Azure in the connection string in the beginning of the addition in here. The name is Sitefinity. The connection string will be the name of the server, .database.windows.net, exactly like what the SQL Azure website told you. And then our database itself is called SF4 test. And then the user ID in here, we'll call it SF user. Remember, we just created that user. Alrighty. And the password for this will be something I'm not going to show you. Alrighty. So other than that, will be something that you can do a trusted connection equals to false. Very, very important to have that to make sure that you're not using the trusted connection, and the encrypt equals to true. There is really nothing else that you need to pass in here. As long as you have the DB type equals to Azure, the name is, of course, is going to be Sitefinity. The connection string have to have the full server name coming from Azure, the database, which is your catalog SF4 test. You're going to pass the user ID as the user ID you created at the name of your server, okay? And finally, the password will be passed in here. Again, I will be putting all that line available for you in the blog that I will be created based on this video. Also, you can get this from the documentation as well for SQL Azure as well. Alrighty? Alright, so I went ahead and added my password in here to be able to log in. And now let's go ahead and try to run this and see if it will work. There's Chrome running. It's trying to access the database, and I got an error. It says login failed for user SF user. So the good news is I'm pretty close. I'm actually trying to get into the Azure based on my local host in here, and I'm having a problem with SF user, which actually makes sense to me. I think I forgot to do something in here, which is, if I go in here, there is my SF4 test inside of the database. The SF4 user does not have actually a password. I didn't make it part of the Falafel admin. That's all. So we'll make it part of the Falafel admin. That's what I should have done. So make sure when you create a user, you make them part of a login that you already have. Notice here for my master, for instance, for security, that have my users. I have a Falafel admin user. I recommend for you not to use your main login user for the entire SQL Azure. This is like using the SA, which is not a very good idea. So you might want to actually create your own security for the master table, for the master database here in SQL Server for Azure. And then when you create a user in here, make that user based on that login. Remember, there is a difference between the user and the login. So let's say, for instance, I'm going to create a login called Sitefinity users. Okay, and once you create that in the master database, you can create a user now called Lino, for instance, for login Sitefinity users. You see what I'm saying? As long as the owner of that database will be the SF user, so you can actually control it. For right now, I'm just going to go ahead and do something not very good, which is I'm going to make the Falafel admin, which is like SA, the username for my connection string. All right, I changed my Falafel, puts an L in here. Falafel admin, add the name of the server name. I'm not going to unfortunately show you the password for that. And let's go ahead and save this guy. And I am going to go ahead, stop this from running. And we'll run it one more time. There you go. And this time, if we've done everything right, you will notice that the local host will hit the database based on the Azure SQL Server, and it will initialize everything. And I should get my main page that says welcome to SQL Azure. And that site will be running right now fully on SQL Azure for Sitefinity. And there we go. Alrighty, so that is a website running completely on SQL Azure at this point. I hope you enjoyed this video. It gives you a little bit of an insight of what's going on about migrating your database from SQL Express or regular SQL, for instance, to SQL Azure, and how to get Sitefinity using the correct data config file with the correct connection strings to hook up to it right away. In our next video for part 2, we'll show now how to move the entire web application into its own app fabric on the Windows Azure system. Thank you.